Pod in My Noggin, hosted by CK Sims, creating a platform to elevate, educate, and heal by creating a space where people can share their stories of struggle, triumph, and redemption. CKS Media.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Pod in My Noggin. I'm your host, CK Sims, and today we are joined by an author, a therapist, and someone who I'm really excited about talking to. So we are speaking with Phyllis E. Leavitt.
It's actually Levitt, but that's fine.
Levitt. Okay. I was going to say Levitt first, and then I saw the EA, and I'm like, good try. So Phyllis E. Levitt, welcome to the show. Thank you so much for being here.
And thank you so much for having me here. Thank you.
So there's so many things. There are so many things. So first, I just want to call out to everybody who's going to be listening today. Phyllis has written a book that I must buy because I need to read it. America in Therapy. And I remember when I saw this, I had mentioned to you just before we hit record, that when I saw that one just really like gut punched me in a way that was like, oh my gosh. I'm like, that is something, not just America, but Canada could do with some therapy too, right? But we're going to talk about that. But I want to talk about first what brought you here. If we can go back to the beginning.
Yeah, I think like so many people, I ended up in a career that had incredible personal relevance for me. I had abuse early in my childhood that I totally buried. And I just had no idea what was wrong with me. I just had so many distraught feelings and fears. And I felt like I kind of lived under a shadow. And so because I had no memory of what had happened to me early in life at that time, I just concluded that there was something, flawed about who I was intrinsically. And I was just doing my best to hide that and to compensate for it. And the way that I compensated in my family was to be a really good student. And I actually loved learning. So that worked okay for me, but it didn't heal anything in my relationship life. It was sort of a place of solace, but it didn't heal anything internally for me until I just got to, like so many people, like the dark night of the soul time of my life, which was in my 30s. I had 3 little children. I was in a very dysfunctional marriage, and I finally went to therapy. And it really was life-changing for me and also at that time, and I think this was sort of a perfect storm of things coming together. Nobody went to therapy when I grew up. It was definitely something that had a big stigma around it, and I didn't know anything about it. But some of my friends had started to go to therapy, and I was starting to have memories. Very disjointed, very disconnected, very disconcerting, but something was bubbling up from my unconscious. And so it was really the perfect time for me to do some very, very deep inner work, which I did. And over a period of time, it was not a quick fix, but it opened up the whole world of psychology for me. And I began to read books on psychology. I began to read like lots of autobiographies and biographies of people who had made a healing journey. So I kind of, emerged from that darkness over a number of years, actually. And became a therapist myself. And then I just had these 2 really, probably more, but really big ahas that there are so many untreated people in the world. There are people who go on living the way I was living, who have no idea why they feel the way they do, why they make the choices that they make that are not necessarily good for them, and who can't get out from under that shadow, either because the trauma never ends. If someone's in a war-torn country, or they're living in poverty in a way that they can't escape, if they live under a heavy burden of discrimination or alienation of some kind in their society, there are millions of people who don't find healing. And I was symptomatic in my own ways. My symptoms were more of the variety of depression and anxiety. But many people have, and they were painful, but didn't necessarily show. I tried my best to hide that. But for many people, their symptoms really do show, and they're highly destructive in the outer world as well as their inner world. People who become enraged and highly aggressive, who act out the abuse and neglect that they've suffered on other people, even people they care about, people who become severely addicted or immobilized with depression, or they're just spend their whole life trying to please other people and try to belong the best they can because they don't feel like they belong inside. And there's just a whole host of symptoms that people have when they don't have access to escape from harm or have an opportunity to heal. And I felt like I needed to write about that. And the other big aha, and I'll just say this real quick and please jump in, is because so much of psychotherapy today is focused on family conditioning. We learn, so much about ourselves and how to cope and what the role models are for men and women, for conflict resolution, for what's expected, on and on, from our families of origin or our immediate community. What I, just became like this light bulb that had to burst was our largest institutions operate on family dynamics as well, and they're either healthy family dynamics or they're highly dysfunctional and abusive and even murderous family dynamics. And we have both of those things going on in our country today. We have things that are wonderful that people do, incredible acts of generosity and social justice movements and people trying to help the poor. And we have a lot of very abusive policies coming down from the top that are harming and hurting millions of people and causing enormous suffering that just keeps on repeating. So I had to write about it. That's my book. And then the rest of it is like, what does the world of psychotherapy and psychology have to offer that could help us heal as a country from so much divisiveness and escalating violence?
So that's a lot. Right.
Yeah.
But no, it's a lot. And you said so many brilliant things in there. I think, and I struggle with being a goldfish, and I will think of things and then forget them. And so I want to go back real quick. It's interesting because you made a statement about when you were abused as a child, your way of coping was being the perfect student. And it's really interesting because that I don't think you consciously chose in that time to do it, but that was your outlet to sort of mask and be small and be the perfect person who's trying to not get more abuse, all of those things. It was really interesting that I don't know if people understand how often children have to do that to find those outlets and to find some way of so one of the most beautiful things that I've ever heard in therapy, and I've heard a lot of really beautiful things and some crazy things as well, but beautiful things mostly. I think about 3 or 4 years ago, I was exposed to some re-traumatization that I had not known was there. So it was a surprise to me. And in that process, I went through the work of going through it and bringing up the childhood pieces and stuff like that. It's interesting because I look back and I realized it was more myself. It wasn't my parents at all, really, if you think about it. They were doing the best that they could. They didn't do anything to actively damage me. It was how I perceived certain actions, right? Knowing that now as an adult, I was not abused as a child, even though a therapist once asked if I was, because I had symptoms, situations, similar how you talked about, but I wasn't. We've done regression therapy and all of that stuff. There's no memory whatsoever. But anyway, back to this. One of the things that they said to me, and I found really important, and for anybody at home, is that when you are a child and you are being abused in your nuclear family or your guardianship or your community or things like that,
right?
If even as children, we are wired to survive. Okay. That's an innate thing every human has. And in order to survive those particular situations, we cannot identify or accept that the abuser is the monster. We internalize that we must be the monster. And when that was said to me, it really just kind of shook me a lot. And not just in my own sort of situation, but just in many people's situations.
Mm-hmm.
Somebody's giving you
Mm-hmm.
housing and food and clothing and things like that. They can't be the monster. It just won't work inside your brain. So then we convince ourselves that we're the monster, we're the problem, we're the issue. And I think that that's a really important thing to keep in mind when you're thinking about trauma when you're growing up. Now, when you said you were in a dysfunctional marriage and you were in your 30s and you started to have flashbacks, kind of disjointed flashbacks.
Right.
What did that look like? Like, not necessarily the details of what it was you were having flashbacks towards. Like, if somebody was listening right now, what would that kind of look like to them?
Well, for me, I think it's different for different people. I've worked with so many people that it occurs for different people in different ways. For me, it was a lot of really intense, very painful emotions that didn't seem connected to anything, like tremendous darkness and fear. There were also like body sensations that were also disjointed and not connected necessarily to an image. And I was in a hypnotherapy class at one point doing my master's work in psychology, and we were practicing on each other, different hypnotic techniques. And I just did it like everybody else. And so when I was the client in the little set that we had, I went into a place and I couldn't get out. I went into some kind of darkness and I could not get out. And, my conscious mind was still functioning and I knew that something terrible was happening, but I couldn't do anything about it. And finally the instructor came over and helped me get out of that very dark, very frightened place. So one of the things that I learned, and this is true for some people and it's not true for everyone. Some people just remember, I was at my grandfather's house or I was sitting on the sidewalk and this person came up and they did blah, blah to me. For me, it was very disjointed memories. So the body sensation wasn't attached to a picture, or there was a flashback of a picture, but nothing attached to that. And the therapy that I did helped me put those pieces together. And what I learned later as a therapist is that that's often the case for people. When something is so traumatizing to your psyche, it can't remember the whole thing together because it's overwhelming. So in a part of your brain that they call the amygdala, that memory of trauma gets broken apart. And it's just a way that we try to preserve ourselves and protect ourselves from the full impact of what happened. And so therapy really helped me to put those pieces together. And I finally made sense to myself. I understood so many of the ways I had reacted to difficult situations, the kinds of people I had been attracted to. It all just began to make sense. I understood myself. And somehow out of that healing journey, which is, impossible to describe in a 2-minute segment, but somehow out of that healing journey, I really was able to find light. And I was able to make different choices. And then I was really on a healing path. And I knew that so deeply for myself that I felt like it was one of the things that I could bring to the therapy situation of people that I worked with, that I knew it was possible to emerge from that kind of trauma.
And it is. It is. I've seen it in others. I've seen my healing from trauma on my own. And, trauma, there's varying degrees of trauma, varying degrees of severity.
Right.
And as you mentioned earlier, like people who are in war-torn countries or, all of those different things. People experience, say, school shootings or any of that stuff. Like, these leave a mark. One thing I always say also in leadership to people, we just went through a global pandemic, right? Where everything was shut down, travel was prohibited, actions were prohibited, some places had curfews. Like, we thought, oh, it's going to be a couple of weeks max. And it
Right.
really kind of lasted like 2 years, if you think about it. And the threat of it coming back has loomed for at least another year, for sure. What I try to tell people is, in situations where they come to me and she was like, I don't know, the pandemic changed me. I don't deal with things the way I used to. I'm like, of course it did. The pandemic changed everybody, like every single person. Maybe it's not great changes, but they're subtle changes. And how you cope with things might have changed. How you emote to things might have changed. It was a global communal trauma experienced by everybody, because no one thought in the free world that we would be prohibited from movement and all of those things. That goldfish moment just now, again, you went to therapy, you wrote books about your own journey. Understanding, so I have said on this podcast maybe 2 or 3 times that I am of the firm belief that every single person alive should go get therapy. Without, like, even if you feel fine, go see a therapist, pay for 6 sessions, talk through them, explore the realms. Maybe there's everybody has something that they can potentially improve. But yeah, therapy is such an important component of life. And like you, therapy has changed mine. And so I won't spend much time on it, but like, because I talked about it before, I spent a really long time in darkness. And especially between 30 and 35, where that darkness turned to hopelessness and pointlessness and an attempt, right? And it was being in therapy and making the choice to say, how can I change things up with all of the therapeutic knowledge that I have in my own arsenal right now, and more research, and go through that process and change my life. And like yourself, found the light, had that healing journey, which is never linear. It is always messy.
Right.
So,
Totally.
I encourage everyone to go on a healing journey, but just so you're aware, there is a very messy period in that healing journey, but it'll be worth it at the end. We're going to take a quick break. We're going to be right back.
Life in Stitches by C.K. Sims. Available for purchase in paperback and ebook on all major platforms. Partner today with C.K. Sims and Pod in My Noggin to get in front of an audience that cares. You will be supporting mental health stories, tales of resilience, and uplifting content, aligning your brand with bringing goodness, authenticity, and kindness front and center. This spot could be yours. Do you have a story of struggle and resilience? One that you want to share with others and possibly help someone through their own struggles? Find the link in the show description and fill out the guest form today.
Welcome back, everybody. Thanks for tuning in. Today we are talking to Phyllis E. Levitt, who is an author and a psychotherapist. Before the break, we were talking about some therapy, trauma from childhood, and how Phyllis used therapy, really, to transform your life and then made it your profession. But you also wrote a book, which we talked about a little bit. We're going to talk about a little bit more. So your book is called America in Therapy. And like I said before, brilliant title. What brought you there? How did you get to that part?
Yeah. And let me just pick up on something you said earlier, because I think it's a good illustration of the larger kind of perspective that my book brings and that my experience brought for me. When you were talking about COVID and what happened, the trauma wasn't only that we were all of a sudden very frightened of dying from this horrible disease. And there definitely was that, especially for the initially, everybody was terrified they were going to get this thing and be on a respirator and die. And we were, we reacted out of tremendous fear, which was probably appropriate because it was such an unknown. But the other half of the trauma was actually the way the country reacted. It was the way people reacted to this unknown illness that was killing people all over the world. It became a source of great divisiveness, political divide, hatred, opposition, infighting, people turning against people in their own families. Should you get a vaccine? Should you not? That became a political issue. And that's what we've found in the world of family therapy. It's not just what happens to people or in human relations in general, not just but that's the basis of it, is our understanding of family dynamics. It's not just what happens to a person. It's not just that they were abused or that they were in a car accident or their house was torn apart in a hurricane, but mostly, our injuries are from other people. But it's the way people respond then. So when someone tries to tell that they were abused and they're not believed, or they're told to get over it and put it in the past, or if the perpetrator is protected because they're a family member that no one wants to confront. So our human response to trauma can be healing, and it can be excessively traumatizing on top of the original trauma. And I think what happened in our country, the response, instead of joining together and really putting our best heads together and trying to resolve whatever we could, learn whatever we could about COVID, come together and form a policy about how best to react to it, medically, socially, interactionally, in terms of, being exposed to one another, all of those things became really hot political issues that just further divided and traumatized people. And so I just want to emphasize that, because the thrust of my book is really about, are our family systems helping us on a mental health level and on a physical level too, or are they hurting us? And so many of the ways we've reacted are to divide and conquer, or to make people wrong, and to ostracize certain people or blame them or jail them or target them for further abuse. And that's exactly what happens in an abusive or neglectful or dysfunctional family. And so that lens of looking at America, and it's really anybody all over the world, but I talk about America because that's the country I'm familiar with, of bringing family systems to look at, are we functioning as a healthy family? Are we reacting to a crisis in a healthy way, or are we just continuing the trauma? And so that's one of the big gifts that I think the world of mental health really has to offer. And then I just want to say one quick thing about what you shared about your own dark night of the soul. For me, it was a really hard time. Remembering things that were really painful is painful. There's no way around that. But what I will say is, and I remembered saying this before, so I wanted to represence it again. In a way, the dark night of the soul is what preceded the work that I did. It wasn't actually in the work that I did, because the work that I did brought the dawn. It was discovering the truth about myself was liberating, and it changed my life. So for people who are afraid to go to therapy, who think they're just going to be re-traumatized by remembering things that were hurtful or scary, or, really, made us feel like maybe we would die, it's not re-traumatizing. I was not re-traumatized by remembering, and no one that I've ever worked with has been re-traumatized by remembering even the most incredibly frightening things that happened to them, because they were in a safe place with a safe person, and the memory actually freed them from the pain that they were suffering. So I just wanted to say those things, and that's what we need in our country. As a country, not just as individual people, we need a safe place. We need to make it safe for people to process their trauma, and especially socially and politically induced trauma as well as individual, so that they can recover themselves and return to a place of love and cooperation and safety for the way they react and respond to other people.
Yeah, like I hadn't thought of it that way from a family perspective. It makes perfect sense to me. And then, I think about pandemic from the political sensationalized, because I feel like there was a lot of play on fear during that period in the media and from politicians and things like that, public figures. And I hadn't really thought about it through that lens either. But it's an interesting lens. So you're looking at family dynamics, and is it good? Is it bad? Is America dysfunctional? Who am I to say? I'm not American, but I love lots of Americans, right? American people. And we are neighbors. So we get to, I'm in the US 5 to 10 times a year. I think what I'm curious about is America and therapy. How would you apply the concepts in the book to the current political structure? And what I mean, I'll put it out there, Kamala versus Trump. Mm-hmm. How would you apply it in that sort of form?
Yeah. Well, I think one of the things that I talk about is, first of all, I want a presence that the whole world of psychology and healing our mental health is a nonpartisan pursuit. Yes. The whole field of psychology is about healing our human relations, whether it's our relationship with ourselves or a relationship with other people. And it's healing the wounds that have set us up to be dysfunctional, whether we're self-harming or we're ragers or we're isolates, or we just can't maintain a good relationship, or are attracted to people who aren't good for us, or we drink too much, whatever. It's from our wounds that we have sustained with other people that our most dysfunctional behaviors and beliefs and attitudes arise. And so I think when we look at our country and we see such infighting and, such a investment in not telling the truth to one another, and to maintaining a stance of one person has to beat the other, one is good and the other is evil, that these are dysfunctional dynamics on a mental health level. When people are mentally healthy, it's not that we will have no more conflict. I don't actually foresee that for human beings. I think that we will always disagree on something. We'll always have different needs. We'll have different beliefs. We'll have different opinions. And we'll have different stances about how people should behave. So that's not the problem. Conflict is actually not the problem. It's how we handle it. And when people are mentally more or less healthy, they can tolerate the distress of having other people not agree with them or not getting their way without acting out. And that's a real challenge for us as human beings. How do we tolerate the distress of, I really don't believe in what you're saying. I don't like what you're saying. I think what you're saying is wrong or destructive or whatever. How can I tolerate the distress of that and still stay in relationship with you, still talk to you, still try to work it out the very best that I'm able to do? And, and we know from human relations, many things that we know in the field of psychology of working with people. People come, let's just say a couple comes to therapy when they're not getting along. That's what usually brings them to therapy. And so we help them listen to each other. We don't say that one's right and this one's wrong, and you have to listen to what your husband says and obey, or you have to listen to your wife and obey her. We never say that. We try to help people listen deeply and work out their differences to the very best of their ability. And sometimes when people can really listen to each other the way they want to be heard and speak the way they want to be spoken to, that just resolves the issue. The issue just disappears because it was in the communication that the conflict really got fueled and accelerated. And sometimes people need to reach agreements, and sometimes they can't. And when they can't, mentally healthy people will do their best to separate without violence, without doing injury and harm to one another. And these are some of the underlying things that the best psychology has to offer our country. Can, the two parties in Congress learn to listen without acting out on each other? Can they learn how to listen deeply so that they can maybe even validate some of the things that each other has to offer, or make compromises for the good of the family of America? Because we know in our offices, in our private offices, and I've seen it over and over and over again, that when parents are continually fighting, their children suffer and they become symptomatic. And when our leaders are fighting and at odds and threatening and spreading terrible misinformation about each other to further divide the populace, the whole populace suffers, and we are. And some people are suffering more than others in our country.
And I think, when it comes to Mr. Trump and Madam Harris, I have my own biases, right? I know where I sit. I know what my issues are with each candidate. What I try to do, and like you make me think of my best friend when you're talking about the unable to agree, but then still try to make it work. It's totally possible. For as many things as my best friend and I have in common, there are some fundamental things that we are absolutely opposite on.
Right.
And for me, when this comes up, we have a conversation. I express that I think that he may be wrong, and he will express that I may be wrong. But that's okay, because at the end of the day, our differences don't mean that we're not going to be best friends. It just means that we have differences. And I look at, the parties in, Congress, the same here in Canada with conservatives and liberals. I look at the situation, and exactly as you said, if people learn to listen the way they wanted to listen the way they wanted to be heard,
right?
Spoke the way they wanted to be spoken to. What a difference that would be! Because communication, I always think communication in anything, business, politics, relationships, always typically the number one problem. It's just either a lack of or dysregulated communication, or people just not knowing how to properly communicate. So I look at Mr. Trump, and for me, I find that he's not my person. And there's a lot of things about him that I think is categorically wrong for a leader in the free world. But at the end of the day, where I land is that he's still a human being. And maybe he's very much a polarizing character, but he's still a human being. He's still somebody's son. He's still somebody's father, husband, friend. And I think if everybody, so the parents are fighting, we've agreed on this establishment, spreading misinformation, all of those things. Then we look at the people underneath, right? The children, if you will. The children of America. They're divided. They're being fed misinformation. Their fears are being played on. If everybody in America, if every child, every adult could look at each other as being just a human first and nothing else, just a human first. So they're deserving of life, liberty, access to healthcare, food, water, all of those things. Just those basic components. Because at the end of the day, regardless of our beliefs, you and I are exactly the same. Anybody I meet in the street are exactly the same. We are human first. So using psychology principles, you believe, and I tend to believe with you, that we could perhaps change.
Well, let me say this. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Yeah. Well, what I was going to say is, what brings most people to therapy is pain. Something isn't working in their life, whether it's totally internal. It's not usually just internal, but internally and in their relationship life, in their business life, in their relationship with their children, in whether they have friends or they don't, whether they're able to express their most, deepest creative desires or not. But there's some pain that they can't resolve that brings them to therapy. And most often it has to do with relationship in some way. Relationships that don't work, relationships where they can't get their needs met, where they feel abused by other people in the present, where they can't find the love in their life or the belonging in their life that they want. So, or the pain of an addiction. I could go on, but it's pain that brings people to therapy. And often what has them not come to therapy until a breaking point is the ways that they deny that pain, whether they stuff it down or they try to compensate for it, or they drink too much, or there's some way that we just don't want to feel it, or we take pills, we medicate, whatever we do to not feel that pain until it breaks through. And I think there's so much pain going on in America today. So many people are suffering from not being able to earn a living wage, from feeling that there's incredible discrimination aimed at them on a societal level and keeping them from a sense of belonging or a sense of thriving. There's so much depression in our country today from a lack of belonging. I mean, the list goes on and on. The pain in our country is enormous, and the ways that we distract and self-medicate are also enormous. And so, one of the things that is actually helpful is when the pain breaks through the denial. It hurts, but it becomes the motivator for healing. And so part of what the many things that I aim to talk about is let our pain break through. Let's feel it. It's when your appendix is bursting, if we didn't feel pain, we'd just die. It would burst, our whole body would be flooded with the infection, and we'd be gone. So that pain serves a useful purpose. And I think we have to reorient ourselves to the pain that's going on in our country and not try to silence the people who are calling out to the pain, and not try to deny it, and not distract, and not, rechannel it into some political big divide and opposition, which is part of the denial of what's actually going on in people's lives in America today. Let's feel it. Let's make it safe to feel it, and then actually look for the roots of it. And inevitably, we're going to find that the roots of all of our pain, because this is what I've discovered over all the years that I've been a therapist and all the work that I've done myself, is some injury to love and safe belonging. And so our whole political system doesn't talk about love and safe belonging. It doesn't ever talk about love. It's not on anybody's party platform, and it's the one thing that heals all. And so I think we have to really open that whole Pandora's box of pain, and what we know actually really heals.
And my wish would be that would happen.
Me too.
Globally.
Me too.
Everyone would feel their pain, acknowledge that it's there, seek the help, and begin healing. And I know it's a lofty hope, but not everyone's going to do it. It's
right.
not going to happen. But if we can, through you writing and appearing on podcasts and you being a guest on my podcast, reach anybody and change them. This is why we show up and do what we do. This is why we have these conversations.
Right.
You've been wonderful. For anybody who wants to learn more about Phyllis, you can go to www.phyllislevitt.com. I'm going to spell it, but I'm also going to link it. So it's PHYLLISLEAVITT.com. You have Facebook, YouTube, LinkedIn, Instagram, Twitter, and Substack. Someone's a writer. And where's your book? Is your book online?
Yes, my book, you can order it from my website. You can go to Amazon or Barnes & Noble or any of the major booksellers. It's available. And let me just share that if you go to my website and you sign in to contact me or get my newsletter, you will receive a free PDF on the 6 elements of repair after conflict. And I just really want to share that. It's free because most of us don't have the tools of how to repair, even when we want to. I mean, many times people end up in fights and then they don't know how to get back together. And so their defenses just keep mobilizing and mobilizing, and they're afraid to say, I'm sorry, or can we talk? And so I really outline the 6 elements of repair that I call them the 6 secrets of repair, but they're not really secrets. It's just that we didn't all learn them growing up. So please, sign in and get that PDF, and please read my book because I really feel like the whole field of mental health really does have something to offer our whole social, cultural, and political climate that is missing.
I love this. So everyone go buy the book, sign up, get that free 6, give me a second, I'm going to remember, 6 elements of repair after conflict.
Right.
There you go. I just championed my goldfish moment. Took back the pound. So go do that. That's phyllislevitt.com. I will link it in the description as well. What is next for you?
Yeah, so what I'm working on right now, and actually if you get on my mailing list, I will let you know when this is available. I'm working on a course that takes all the principles of my book and makes them personal to you. So that course is going to be available sometime, I think, in the next few months, as well as also doing, and this is also going to be available even sooner. I did a whole quiz on finding out what your conflict type is. Well, how do you typically react to conflict? Does it work for you? Where did you learn it? And all kinds of related things like that. So all of those things you'll be notified about if you get on my mailing list. And of course, I'll talk about them on all my social media as well if you don't. But those are the things that I'm working on right now. And, lots of ideas for a sequel to this book. So that's a possibility as well.
I love this. I love this. So everyone, go follow Phyllis on social media. Sign up to her newsletter, phyllislevitt.com, so you can stay in the know. The quiz sounds really interesting as well. And Phyllis, thank you so much for being a guest today. I really appreciated the conversation. I wish you nothing but the best. And for everyone at home, don't forget to get out there and live your wildest dreams. Until next time.
Thank you.
For media and sponsorship inquiries, email info@cksims.com or visit cksims.com and fill out the contact form. Be sure to subscribe so you don't miss an episode. A new episode airs every Saturday. CKS Media.